Before we start this week's Parsha podcast, two quick notes. Be'ezrat Hashem, with the help of the Almighty, there will be a Parsha podcast next week, but as you know, it's the week before Pesach, which is basically the busiest week in the year, or one of the busiest weeks in the year. So although there will, please God, be a Parsha podcast next week, we're not going to have Torah Zoom on Tuesday nights or on Tuesday night next week. I'm busy preparing for Pesach, and I hope to record the podcast earlier in the week, and I don't want to be constricted and limited to Tuesday night. It's going to be chaos and mayhem here at the Wolby home. In addition, the following week, it's actually Pesach itself, Passover, so there is no Parsha. So this week is Vayikra. Next week, without Torah Zoom, but yes, in the podcast, is Tzav. The following week, there is no Parsha, so there's no Parsha podcast. And the following week after that, that's Parshas Shemini. So we will once again gather together on torchzoom.com 3 weeks from tonight on the 22nd of April. But next week, please God, there is a Parsha and there is a Parsha podcast, but there is no Torah Zoom. The following week, there's no Parsha podcast because there is no Parsha and there's certainly no Torch Zoom. So we will reconvene next time after Pesach for Parshas Shemini. But please God, we hope to not miss. We can't miss now, right? We're too deep into this. Where in the Book of Leviticus, we cannot miss quite yet. So please God, we'll have a Parsha podcast next week, notwithstanding all the work that needs to get done. That's item number one. Item number two, we've been having a bit of a problem with the mail at the new Torah Center. It's like a postal nightmare. We only get a couple of pieces of mail a week. And we also forwarded from the old location, and a bunch of people have told me that their mail was returned. They sent mail to the Torah Center. It was returned as undeliverable. So first of all, I apologize if that happened to you. And our administrator went to the post office already twice to try to figure out what's going on. We're very calm about it. We're not going postal about it. But I will request that if you are trying to send us any mail, hopefully we'll get it resolved and track down all the missing mail. But hold off sending any mail until we get this straightened out. If you want to send it, you can send it to my house directly. Email me for the address. But I apologize for this problem. We are not getting all of them. We're getting some. That's why it's a little confounding. Some of the mail is going through, but most of it is not. And just to let you know about that and to apologize, and hopefully we'll get this resolved and recoup all the missing mail. And of course, if you want to send me an email, my email address has not changed in many years, rabbiwolby@gmail.com. Well, we're here in the Book of Leviticus. It's Parshas Vayikra. It's the Book of Vayikra. And everyone's so excited to get started. And we're all excited to learn about sacrifices. What type of sacrifices? All types of sacrifices. Elevation offerings. The carbon ola. And that comes in all sorts of varieties. Cattle and sheep and birds. And that's chapter 1. And then all sorts of flour offerings, meal offerings. It could be with flour, or it could be oven-baked, or it could be pan-baked, or it could be baked in a deep pan. And then we read about all types of peace offerings, the carbon shlamim, and sin offerings, and guilt offerings. It's very exciting stuff. And you think I'm joking. You think that this is the Parsha podcast, wake me up when Leviticus ends. Oh no, I saw something brand new. New for me, but so fascinating that even you will agree it was worth tuning in to this week's edition of the Parsha podcast. The book, indeed, the Parsha begins. God calls Moshe. He summons him and he speaks to him. And what does he say? Speak to the children of Israel and tell them, when a person brings a sacrifice, meaning an elevation offering, it is from different types of animals, a large animal, a livestock, or a smaller animal, a sheep, or even a bird. But all the commentaries observe that the verse does not say when a person, Ish, brings a sacrifice, Rather, it says Adam, or man, when a man brings a sacrifice. And Rashi already observes that there's an emphasis on Adam, which is man. The word means man, but of course it harkens back, it invokes Adam, the original man. So Rashi asks the question, why does the verse not say ish when a person brings it? And it says Adam, which is a man. It's the same word, but it does seem to evoke Adam. So Rashi explains that Adam brought a sacrifice. He brought a robust bull with one big horn, we're told. And Adam, well, it was just him. It was a one-man show. It was Adam and Eve and basically no one else. And therefore, where did Adam get this animal from? He definitely did not steal it. After all, the whole world was his. When you bring a sacrifice, says Rashi, you have to bring it like Adam did. It cannot be brought from stolen animals. Suppose a person says, you know what, I want to bring a sacrifice. We learned about the power of sacrifices and how it transforms a person. I want to bring a sacrifice, but I don't have any animals to bring a sacrifice with. You know what I'll do? I'll go pilfer from the neighbor. I'll steal their bull or their sheep or their goat or a bird, and I'll bring it as a sacrifice. And it'll be a wash. Of course, it's a sin. It's a sin to steal, but it's a mitzvah to bring a sacrifice, so we'll call it even. The verse tells us no. A sacrifice brought from a stolen animal is invalid. It's only if it's like Adam. Adam, when he brought a sacrifice, it was not stolen. Only then is it valid. That's what she tells us. The observation is that the verse uses the word Adam, meaning man, but also meaning Adam. A sacrifice has to be like Adam. That's the first idea. We've mentioned this in the past. There is another idea that we've also mentioned in the past, and that is that Adam brought a sacrifice, and so did Adam's two older sons, Cain and Abel. In chapter 4 of Genesis, Cain brought a sacrifice, Abel brought a sacrifice, and that led to the scuffle, that led to the violence that kick-started humanity on the wrong foot. Abel's sacrifice was accepted. Cain's sacrifice was rejected. And Cain raised some Cain. He was not happy about it. And they got into a fight. And we know what happened. He murdered his own brother. And then he was castigated for it. The bloods of your brother are calling out to me from the ground. And Cain tried to repent, but it only lasted for 7 generations. We know the story, chapter 4 of Genesis. So Adam brought a sacrifice. He brought a fat bull with one horn. And Cain brought a sacrifice. It was an offering, but it was low-quality fruits. That's why it was rejected. And Abel also brought a sacrifice, which was accepted. Now, so we have 3 people here and 3 sacrifices. But there's a qualitative difference, the commentaries tell us, between Adam's sacrifice and the sacrifice of his 2 sons. Cain brought a sacrifice, but he brought not the highest quality stuff. It was low-quality tributes, offerings to God. And that's why it was rejected. Cain thought, you know what, God doesn't really need this. Why should I waste the best fruits? I'll just give the leftovers, and that should be enough. It's the thought that counts. And that was unacceptable, and it was rejected. Now, Abel, he brought from the choicest of his flock. So Abel's sacrifice on its own was good, but he did not initiate it. He copied his brother Cain. So there was a flaw in both Cain's sacrifice, low quality, low grade gift, and in Abel's sacrifice that he did not initiate it, he just copied. And thus the commentaries tell us, when the verse introduces the concept of sacrifices, it says, Adam, bring like Adam, meaning initiate. Don't be like Abel, who only copied, who doesn't have any internal motivation to bring your gift to God. Instead, initiate, like Adam did, and bring a fat bull, a robust offering. That is the way to do it in the best fashion, where it comes from within, and also it is the highest quality, the choicest, the best. It doesn't have the flaw of neither Cain nor Abel. Now, of course, this is talking about sacrifices, but this could be easily applied to every other part of our religious, spiritual life. Our agenda, our spiritual agenda, should be, on one hand, it should be something we initiate. We undertake. We're not simply mimicking others. We should invest our creativity and our thought towards our offering to God. Even if we don't bring a sacrifice, when we dedicate ourselves to God, we contribute something of ourselves to God. That's a form of a sacrifice. And that brings closeness. It fosters, it forges a relationship between us and God. The word in Hebrew for sacrifice, karbon, it's the same word as karov, or it's the same root as closeness. This is a way to bring closeness. When a person contributes from themselves, from their resources to God, that's a form of a sacrifice, of a self-sacrifice, if you will. When you do it like Adam. Undertake it on your own. Don't just copy. And offer the best, not lower quality. Avoid the mistake of both Cain and Abel. Instead, be like Adam. Restore the ideal of Adam. So that's the second idea as to why the verse uses the term Adam as opposed to Adam as opposed to Ish. But here's the third idea. This is the new idea. This is the idea that will blow your mind. Adam sinned, as we know. If a person sins, says the Midrash, and they sin like Adam, they should bring a sacrifice. The verse uses the word Adam when it should have maybe used the word Ish to tell you that when you're going through something that Adam went through, meaning, God forbid, you made a mistake in a way similar to what Adam did, then you bring a sacrifice. And thus it introduces the subject of sacrifices with the word Adam, the first sinner, so to speak, in going through the process of rectification, of expiation from some Adam-like behavior. You have these instructions, bring a sacrifice. Now, if you just saw that Midrash and you didn't have any context, it wouldn't really be a big insight. But here's the insight. The Or HaChaim says, wait a minute. If a person does a sin willfully, wantonly, then they don't bring a sacrifice. It's only if it's an accident. It was an aberration. They overlooked, they missed something. They weren't realizing what they were doing. They didn't understand. They didn't know that it was Shabbos. But a brazen, willful, wanton sin, you don't bring a sacrifice for. So how does the Midrash compare? Well, when you sin like Adam, bring a sacrifice. No, when you sin like Adam, that was a wanton, willful sin, a brazen sin, with full knowledge, the violation of the will of God. So how does the Midrash compare Adam's sin to the type of behavior that warrants a sacrifice? Says the Or HaChaim, and this is the point that was mind-blowing to me. Actually, Adam's sin was an accident. He wasn't aware of what he was doing. He missed it. He did not know at the time that he was eating from the tree of knowledge, good and evil, that God said, don't eat from. When I read this, I said, wow, I did not know this. And then he explains. He says, in his commentary to Leviticus. He says, look what I wrote in my commentary to Genesis. On chapter 3, verse 12. This got my attention. I said, I'm going to look what he says in his commentary to Genesis chapter 3, verse 12. This is when God accuses or confronts Adam and Eve for their sin. And he goes to Eve, and then he goes to Adam. And Adam says, Ha'isha, the woman that you gave to me, she gave me from the tree and I ate. This is Adam's excuse when he was confronted by God. And the Or HaChaim has a whole piece explaining how Adam's sin was an accident. He wasn't aware of what he was doing. And he says, wait a minute, God's accusing you of a terrible sin. The only mitzvah you had was not to eat from this tree, and Adam flagrantly violated the will of God. And what does he do? He blames his wife, and really he blames God. What sort of excuse is Adam offering? This is not a way to speak to God. So listen to what he says. Again, this is all new to me. Adam did not know that the fruit that he was served by Eve was in fact a fruit from that forbidden tree. He was being given dinner. His wife says, let me get you a fruit. You look like you could use a fruit. And she presents him the fruit. And he's like, I'm not going to ask her where the fruit came from. The Almighty created a whole world for us, a whole garden for us. It's full of wonderful, luscious, delicious fruits. Why would I even think that my own wife, given to me by God Almighty, would deliver me forbidden fruit? So Adam says to God, it was an accident. The woman that you gave to me, meaning this woman is approved by you. I don't need to double check the fruit that she delivers to me. Why did you give me a wife? You gave me someone to help me, someone to aid me, someone to partner with me. There's no way that the wife given to you by God is evil. It's not possible. I don't need to double check. I don't need to investigate. Oh, where exactly did you get that from? I can safely assume, Adam says, that her deeds are righteous and that the food that she serves is good. A great woman who God created to help me. It's not good for man to be alone. Let me give him some helper to aid him. I don't need to investigate and say, I don't trust you. I trust you. Eve is trustworthy. And he did not know, says the Or HaChaim, that it came from that tree until he ate it. He assumed it was a permitted fruit. And only once he ate it, and everything changed, and his eyes opened, and evil began to course within him. Only then did he recognize what had happened. But at the time, he did not know what he was doing. And the reason? Because he relied on his wife. And thus, this was an accident. It's an accidental sin, and he is really blameless for what happened. He never suspected that his wife, that Eve, the woman given to him by God, cannot be trusted and would serve him something forbidden. She was given to him by God. She is trustworthy. This is all part of the Or HaChaim in chapter 3 of Genesis. And then he says, and that's why Adam was not cursed so aggressively. Adam himself was not even cursed. It's only the earth that was cursed. So Adam's sin was an accident. And then he says the only sin that Adam made was when he communicated to Eve the prohibition. He told her, don't touch the tree. Tree is dangerous. And that was intended to prevent her from getting even close to this tree. But like Rashi tells us, when Eve spoke to the serpent, the serpent says, "Could you eat from the trees?" And she says, "Well, we can eat all the trees, but not this one. This one we cannot eat, and we cannot touch it." And the Midrash says that the serpent shoved her into the tree. See, it's not electrified. You could touch the tree. And once she was able to touch the tree, she said, "Well, must be that this prohibition is not a problem. We can eat from it too." And Adam failed to differentiate between what is the actual law, don't eat from the fruit, and what's just a protective fence to avoid getting too close to disaster, not to touch it. That's the end of the piece. Adam's sin was an accident. It was not a willful, wanton sin. And therefore, for this type of sin, sacrifices are the remedy. But here's the problem. Adam brought a sacrifice, and he did not receive the remedy. He was not forgiven. He did not undo the effect of the sin. Adam was condemned to die as a result of this sin, and he brought that fat bull with one big horn, and that did not undo the sin. He was still condemned to die even afterwards. So how come there's a difference between what happened in the aftermath of Adam's sin and anyone who copies Adam and does an accidental sin? When they bring a sacrifice, they are atoned. They are cleansed. They are expiated. Continues the Orach Chaim, and this is based upon the actual words in the Midrash. Adam brought a sacrifice and was not forgiven. Why? And this is the words of the Midrash, because he was the first to sin. Adam's sin was an accident. Our sins, if we sin, God forbid, it could also be an accident, but there's a difference in our accidents and Adam's accident. Why? Because Adam, there was no evil before his sin. He broke the mold. He was the first to sin. Previously, he was unaffected by any evil. And even though there was no evil operating within him, he sinned nonetheless. And therefore his sin, albeit an accident, is worse than an accident done by someone subsequently. All of us, post Adam's sin, we're afflicted. We're contaminated. And thus when we sin, it's not as bad as when Adam sinned. He was pure and pristine, and therefore his sin, albeit an accident, cannot be atoned for by a sacrifice. But us, when we do an accident, and we are already subject to the consequences of Adam's sin, there is impurity already affecting us. Our sins are not as bad, and thus our accidents are atoned for with a sacrifice. Adam, the Talmud tells us, was created circumcised. There was no foreskin, so to speak. There's no evil inclination that he had to undo. In fact, says the Talmud, he was born uncircumcised, but he slapped on a foreskin. He reversed, so to speak, his circumcision. He was mashach arlaso, as if he pulled, so to speak, and created an artificial foreskin. He concealed the crown of God. Our starting point is very different than Adam's starting point. He started off as being totally pure and pristine, and he undid it with the sin. We start off as being a little bit affected, contaminated, tainted, sullied by the after effect of Adam's sin. We have a Yetzer Hara from birth, something that Adam was not affected by. And our goal is to undo it, is to, so to speak, circumcise ourselves, remove said evil. But our starting point is not as lofty as Adam's, and therefore when we do an accident, we can be atoned for with a sacrifice. And the Orach Chaim ends off by saying, typically, God has a grace period for sinners. God punishes only repeat offenders, only someone with a rap sheet. The Talmud tells us, 3 strikes, you're out. The first sin, God overlooks. The second sin, God overlooks. The third sin, okay, now you have to atone for it. You have to repent for it. How come Adam didn't have that same grace period? That same tolerance? Because Adam, he was all pure. He had no evil operating within him. And therefore, he is held to a much higher standard. And that's why his sin, even though it was an accident, it was unable to be forgiven and atoned for with a sacrifice. So yes, when we do a sin like Adam, it's an accident. Like Adam's sin was an accident. But nevertheless, when we do it, we can be atoned for with a sacrifice, even though he was unable to atone and to reverse it with his sacrifice. We're different. We have physicality. We have corruption affecting our soul, the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama. From the moment that we're born, the Yetzer Hara is implanted within us and dominates us by default. And that's why we have so much more of a tolerance. But Adam, he sinned. It was an accident. But nevertheless, his sacrifice did not help him. This to me was incredibly new and novel. I was always under the impression that Adam's sin was willful. He knew exactly what he was doing. And for the first time I hear this new angle, and it seems to be endorsed by the Midrash, Adam's sin was an accident, and that's why when we do accidents, we sin by accident, we bring a sacrifice. But the punchline of the Orach Chaim is that Adam, because he was in a much higher standard, he was in a much higher spiritual state, he's held to a much higher standard, and therefore his sin is way worse than our sin, even though they're both accidents. And therefore our sin can be atoned for with the sacrifice, even though his was not atoned for with his sacrifice. And I was thinking, Adam was held to a higher standard because he was the first to sin. He shattered all that purity that he had by default. And that's why that sin is way worse. Even though, on one level, it's just an accident. Suppose the opposite happened. Suppose someone starts off and they're the anti-Adam. They emerge with impurity. They emerge with distance between them and God. Adam was the first to sin. What about someone who's the first to do a mitzvah? The first to overcome their challenges. If Adam's sin was way worse, but he was the first because he was the first to sin, a mitzvah. The first mitzvah. That must be a much more powerful mitzvah. We've mentioned this Talmud many, many times. The Talmud tells us, who is loftier? Someone who never sinned even once in their life, or someone that lived a very sinful life? But they repented. They changed. And they became a Baal Tshuva. They became a penitent. They returned to God. Who's more lofty? Says the Talmud. In a place where the penitents, where they stand in proximity to God, even someone who's a tzaddik gomer, who never sinned even once, cannot fathom that level, that lofty level of closeness to God. And I was always bothered by this. Wait a minute, this guy never sinned even once. Total purity, pristine from beginning to end. And they have the other guy, who's a sinner. That's the starting point. All sorts of sins, but then he repented. Why would the second guy, the penitent, be loftier? Here we have an answer. The starting point matters. Adam's starting point was just holiness. So yes, he sinned. It was an accident, but so what? He was the first sin. He changed in a negative direction from total purity, and he introduced contamination. That's a way worse sin than someone who starts off with a high degree of contamination. Conversely, if someone starts off with a high degree of contamination and then they purify, that purification is that much more powerful. And thus, the Baal Tshuva, the penitent, can be in a higher level than the person who never sinned even once. Came from a good place, started off on a path of righteousness, and you continue on that path, that's wonderful, but to change the path and to go from impurity and contamination to righteousness and holiness, that's way more powerful. And I think we see this idea, maybe a bit similar idea to this later on in chapter 1 of our book. The verse talks about the third type of elevation offering, an olas ha'of, an elevation offering from a bird. So the verse in chapter 1, verse 14, talks about the different types of birds that qualify. But Rashi observes that the verse begins min ha'of, from the bird. You bring from the bird, which implies you don't bring the whole bird. It's just part of the bird. What does it mean to bring a sacrifice only part of the bird? So Rashi explains that the three types of animals that can be used for an elevation offering, the large animals, the bulls, and the sheep, they must be male and they must be unblemished. But when it comes to the cheapest Ola offering, the bird, it does not need to be male, and it does not need to be unblemished. Even if it's only part of the bird, some of it's missing, it would still qualify as a sacrifice. Now, if it's missing a whole limb, that's a different story. That would not be a kosher sacrifice, but if it's missing only a little bit, the bull and the sheep, they need to be perfect, unblemished. The bird can be blemished. We could say maybe a similar idea. If someone's big, someone's lofty, something is big and lofty and impressive, then a small mistake is really terrible. A small blemish can be disqualifying. Adam was so great, a small blemish was disqualifying, and there's no way to undo it. There's no way to rectify it. Adam was so enormously elevated that he sinned. It was an accident, but he became disqualified. He's blemished. The bird, not as impressive. And you know what? If it's blemished, it's not disqualifying. The more substantial something is, the more elevated something is, the more perfect it has to be. We always give the analogy, the diamond. No one pulls out a loop to examine any imperfection in a regular stone, limestone, sedimentary rock. If it's a diamond, if it's Adam, if it's a bull, if it's a significant entity, it must be perfect, and a blemish, even if it's minor, can be disqualifying. The righteous, they're judged much more critically. They're bigger. They're grander. They must be perfect in every way. The birds, the less significant amongst us, perhaps we call them the sinners, they have more leeway. They're held to a lower standard, and their mitzvos are actually greater than the mitzvos of someone who never sinned at all. Adam was in the highest standard, and he did a slight sin. It was an accident, but it was unforgivable for him. based upon where he came from, where he started from, that is not rectifiable with a sacrifice. All of us, we come post-Adam. And we are impacted by his sin. We start off life with the Yetzer Hara. To us, there's a blemish. We can still be brought as a sacrifice, so to speak. And we have to realize the opportunity that we have. Because one thing that Adam did do for us was create the opportunity for us to become maybe a Baal Tshuva. What's greater? To be born circumcised or to be born uncircumcised? And to manually impose God upon ourselves and banish the Yetzer Hara from ourselves and from the world. If Adam never sinned, he would be very lofty, but you know who would be even loftier? Someone who did suffer from the impact of Adam's sin. Someone who did start off with a Yetzer Hara and undid it. The place where the Baalei Tshuva are. It's much loftier than the place where even someone who was perfect and pristine from beginning to end. What a powerful idea. What a novel idea. I was not expecting this idea. This is a surprise to me. Adam's sin was an accident, according to the Orach Chaim, in his commentary here, in his commentary, chapter 3 of Genesis. It's a novel idea, and it's an opening idea. It gives us, I think, hope to realize that we have so much opportunity. You compare us to our antecedents, even if we are elevated, we're righteous, we grew up Torah observant with consciousness to the will of God. You grew up, you have the great privilege of growing up Shomer Shabbos. You got tefillin for your bar mitzvah, you never missed a day. Compared to your grandparents and your great-grandparents 1,000 years ago, your antecedent Rashi, you're nothing. Compared to such a person. But you know what we have? We have the opportunity to be a Baal Tshuva, to overcome our less impressive starting point. Less is expected of us, and thus when we do, that impact is amplified. Incredible idea. What a way to start off the Book of Leviticus. I told you it was worth it. But that's just the idea. What about the dilemma? It's year 9 of the Parsha podcast. Torah is our ID. The idea is in the books. Listen to this dilemma. It's not really a dilemma that I have to deal with, but all of y'all have to deal with this. What to do when you're competent and talented and gifted and intelligent and accomplished. You have the goods and you're surrounded by a sea of incompetence and you're more talented and more capable than others. You're more accomplished than others. How are you supposed to feel? We know that arrogance, boastfulness, pride is one of the worst things. God hates the proud. Moshe's the picture of humility. Torah only congregates in the humble. But what to do? It's just true. You're just more competent and more accomplished. Does being humble mean to deny the truth? Is humility just ignorance? Can't be, right? So how do you, I'm going to say you, you're so talented, you're so capable, you're so intelligent, what do you do? How do you avoid arrogance? What's the way to achieve humility? Does it mean to think inaccurately? Can't be. We're never supposed to think inaccurately. I'm sorry, it's just not the way of the Jew to think wrong. So how do you think right and achieve humility? So of course, Moshe is the exemplar of humility. And he shows us the way. The first word of our Parsha, and indeed our book. The name of the book, the name of the Parsha, Vayikra. And if you see this in the Torah scroll, you'll notice that the font is not the same. It's not a consistent font. The Aleph, which is the last letter, is small. Why is there a small aleph in the word Vayikra? Now, just parenthetically, something cool. The Midrash tells us that Moshe's face shone brightly. It was as bright as the sun. When he came down the mountain, his face was brilliantly, gleamingly bright. And the Midrash says that when Moshe wrote the Torah, there's a little bit of ink left over on the quill. He had some leftover ink, and God took that and wiped it on his face. So the Midrash says. And when God puts some ink on your face glows. Now, you read that Midrash, it's totally baffling. You obviously realize there's some deep secret over there. And the commentaries say, there's a few different ways that the commentaries say this. The word anav, which means humble one. Moshe is the humblest of men. The word anav is usually spelled with a yud. Ein, nun, yud, vav. In the Torah, the yud is missing. Moshe didn't want to write it. In an act of humility, he said, I don't want to have that letter. So he kind of left that on the quill. And God says, okay, I'm going to take that humility and kind of wipe it on your face, and your face will glow. But alternatively, Moshe was told to write the word Vayikra, which means, and he summoned Moshe. There's nothing greater that can be said about a person, and there's no greater accomplishment than God summoning you, as if God needs you. You matter, you're important, you're existentially important. Moshe did not want to write it. He wanted to write the word Vayikra, which is Vayikra without the aleph, which means God appeared, but it was like almost an accident. And God says, no, you write Vayikra. Moshe didn't want to do it. He says, I'll make it the aleph small. I'll write the word Vayikra, but if you're not looking closely, you can miss it. You could read it as Vayikra. And that was an act of humility, but there was a little leftover ink. Moshe lowered himself, and God elevated him. And that's why his face shone brightly, because that's maybe the deeper message behind that midrash. But why this letter is small is discussed at great length. In the past, I've told you there's a book with 1,000 interpretations. Why 1,000? Because the Hebrew word for 1,000 is elef or aleph, which is aleph. The letter aleph is 1,000. So the great Megal Amukah says, I'll give you 1,000 interpretations. Well, how many interpretations are there? Probably infinite. But 1,000 is certainly a good way to start. But Rashi says, and the Baal Turim endorses, that Moshe did not want to write the letter Aleph. He thought it was too much. God summoned me? No, God appeared to me. And it was almost like a random thing. God appeared to Bilam with the word Vayakar, without the Aleph. The word Vayikra means God summoned Moshe. Moshe didn't want to write it. The verb connotes closeness. It's much more official. God wants you. God needs you. God's summoning you, so to speak. The word Vayakar means almost, it's a happenstance. It was random. It was God appearing surreptitiously, backdoor entry, so to speak, to Bilam. It's not official. It's not one of closeness. Moshe wanted to write Vayakar. Why? Because he wanted to be no greater than Bilam. That's what the Baal Turim says. Rashi implies it. Baal Turim spells it out. But here's the question. Did Moshe really think that he was like Bilam? Bilam is maybe the portrait of evil in the Torah. The worst of the worst. Did Moshe seriously think that he was equivalent in some way to Bilam? It can't be. It can't be. So the commentaries tell us something very profound. The verse at the end of the Torah. When the Torah eulogizes Moshe, it says that there was not a prophet amongst Israel like Moshe. Amongst our people, there never was and never will be a prophet equivalent to Moshe. But in the nations, there was. Only in Israel was Moshe unprecedented. And who is that? That is Bilam. Now, what does it mean that Bilam was equivalent to Moshe in prophecy? Bilam was outfoxed by his donkey, you recall. He missed the angel standing in the way. He totally flubbed the mission of trying to curse the Jewish people. Bilam is a disaster. You cannot persuade me that his prophecy was on the same level as Moshe's prophecy. So the commentaries say something very profound. When the verse says that Moshe's prophecy and Bilam's prophecy were the same level, it doesn't mean that they were qualitatively the same. No, they were not. They were different. Moshe's prophecy was way higher than Bilam's prophecy. However, there's a similarity in that both achieved a higher level of prophecy than maybe they deserved. Moshe's prophecy was higher than what he earned. A part of his prophecy was a gift. Similarly, Bilam really didn't deserve anything. The only reason why he got prophecy is because otherwise there would be a complaint, right, amongst the nations. So the only two prophets that achieved prophecy that exceeded what they earned was Moshe and Bilam. And by Bilam it says Vayikra. It just happened almost by chance. It happenstance. Why? It was actually by chance. He didn't earn it. It was undeserved. And therefore, it says Vayikra was a term that connotes it was not deserved. And Moshe says, wait a minute. I also have undeserved prophecy. Now, Moshe did deserve prophecy, but the level of prophecy that he got was even higher than what he deserved. And therefore, Moshe says it's only fair to write the same word. That was Moshe's argument. Write Vayikra, not Vayikra. But God said no. God said, write the Aleph. So Moshe wrote the Aleph. But he made it small. And the commentaries explain, Moshe is acknowledging his greatness. He's saying, yes, I am Vayikra. God summoned me. I'm writing it down. But he's also saying, if someone else was given the gift that I was given, they would have achieved what I achieved and maybe even more. And therefore, on some level, Moshe is saying, I'm similar to Bilam. I was given more than I deserved. And that's the Aleph being there, but being small. And Moshe certainly knew that he was the greatest prophet who ever lived. He knew that. And he was the humblest of men. Because Moshe argued, if any other person was given what I was given, if any other person was positioned the way I was positioned, if any other person was given the talents and the abilities and the strengths and the background and the circumstances that I had, maybe they would have even exceeded me. Humility does not equal arrogance. Humility is writing Vayikra with a small aleph. This is what I have, but you know what? Really, on some level, I don't even deserve it. I'm like Bilam. Yes, I'm Vayikra, but who knows if someone else had my abilities and my talents, they would have been even greater. The Chazon Ish was the greatest sage of his era. And I read a story about someone who spoke with him and said to him, do you realize that you're the greatest sage in the world? Do you realize that you're a great giant? He knew all of Torah, all of it. And he was the leader of Torah Jewry in his time. Do you realize it? So someone had the chutzpah to ask him that question. And he says, yeah, I realize that. But I'm not prideful. If other people had my talents, had my strengths, were endowed with my God-given gifts, they would have been even greater than me. You must know your greatness. But even if you know your greatness, that does not mean that you think you're better than Bilam. The Aleph is small because you realize that all your talents and all the tools that you use to achieve your greatness, it was all given to you by God. And who knows, someone else with your same set of abilities would have matched and maybe even exceeded what you accomplished. Rabbi Israel Salanter used to say the following sentence: I have the mind of 1,000 men. He was such a other level of a genius. They say that geniuses are a dime a dozen amongst our people. I always make a joke, the average Jewish guy, come on, you never met someone with below average intelligence. You're amongst the Jews. The Jews, it's well known. Again, I don't know anything about this, but I've read that it seems like Jews are overachievers. It seems like the Almighty endowed us with better brains than physical gifts, right? The joke is that there's more Jewish owners than players in the professional sports. Everyone has a certain gift. It's apparently true. Maybe this is a stereotype, but that's what I was told. So I remember someone saying, geniuses amongst us, a dime a dozen. Amongst the geniuses, there's the genius of the genius of the genius. And that's from Israel Salanter. I have the mind of 1,000 men. And that means that the Almighty expects greatness equivalent to that of 1,000 men. And if I accomplish the accomplishments of 999, I've underperformed and I'm in big trouble. Humility does not mean to be ignorant of reality. That's never, ever, ever encouraged. I'm sorry, that's not part of our religious philosophy. Your mind is your tool, your greatest tool to accomplish something beyond the physical. It's the seat of your soul. You cannot allow that to be inaccurate. Moshe knew he was the greatest prophet who ever lived, and still he says, on some level, I'm like Bilam, because it was all given to me by God. That is the answer to your dilemma. You are talented. You are accomplished. You are gifted. You've done wonderful things. Yes. And humility means that all came from God. And who knows, someone with my set of abilities could have and maybe would have achieved even more. This is the beginning of a great book. I'm so excited to be here. It's Leviticus. We had a little bit of a false start when we thought Leviticus was coming early. But we're here now, this time for real. I'm enjoying it. This was a delightful podcast, in my opinion. RabbiWolbe@gmail.com if you disagree or if you agree. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope your Passover prep is going swimmingly. Next week, there will not be a notwithstanding on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. But please, there will be a Parsha podcast I don't want to miss. So we will reconvene for notwithstanding in 3 weeks from today, April 22nd. For Parsha Shmini, again, the week of Passover, Pesach, there is no Parsha. We do read from the Torah, but not something that comes from, not the next installment of Leviticus. So there is no Parsha podcast. Next week, please God, there will be a Parsha podcast, but no towards Zoom. Have a wonderful day. A sensational Shabbos. A successful Passover prep. And if I don't speak with you, a wonderful, happy, and kosher Passover. A Chag kosher v'sameach. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week. And live in person, notwithstanding in a week after Pesach, April 22nd. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.